Hello, everyone. Welcome everybody to the series of interviews about speakers for SatoSHE event on December 10th. And I'm Marina Romashko. I'm a co-founder of Layer Technologies and CEO. And I have one of the speakers with us today, Kristina Flynn, and she's a collector, connector, and consultant increasing diversity and NFT space. Welcome to the interview, Kristina.
Thanks so much for having me.
Wonderful. So we have a set of questions that I will ask you, and I think I would love to learn more about you before you got into NFT space, and then maybe after that, like how is it everything that happened in your life? How did it bring you to NFT world?
Yeah, isn't that the feeling that we all describe, right? It's like I've done all of these different things in my life, and now they've all brought me to this like one monumental moment in time. But yeah, no, my career is very, I guess, unique in that I have done many things. So I am ADHD, and so that gives me like a wonderful superpower of being excited about many different things at once. But my career has sort of followed a very same pattern of like finding something I'm interested in, digging really deep into it, and then moving forward. So I started my career in professional sport, working for an NBA team and kind of acting like the conduit as the conduit between business operations and basketball operations. So essentially, if any marketing, consumer products, ticketing, suite sales wanted anything done from the team, they would come through me and my team, and then we would determine what actually was filtered onto the actual players, coaches, executives, and what wasn't. And so on the one side of things, I had, very formulaic conversations with marketing and consumer products, so many data points, like what each fan did at every single game. Did they get a hot dog or did they get fries? Did they come through gate A or did they come through gate E? And then on the other side, the part that I really loved with the players was all about their personal philanthropic initiatives. What did they care about? And so I got excited about that, but realized the data on that side of things was really missing. Like they didn't know in terms of the people they're serving. They maybe knew names and emails, but that was about it. Right. And so that led me to kind of this obsession just about social impact in general, and then solving the problem of data collection and what does that look like, not just from a donor's perspective, but from an individual's being served. And so I worked on that. I kind of did a number of things in between, working for a friend in New York on his tech company, and then decided to jump full-time into entrepreneurship after a stint with a nonprofit as well. And really just decided, hey, I'm gonna give it a shot. So started a tech company, built out a product, had some pretty good partnerships initially, trying to solve the problem. Struggled a little bit to find product market fit. Just selling to charities and nonprofits in general is very difficult. And ultimately kind of kept going. We bootstrapped, so we didn't raise capital. And when COVID hit in June 2020, we just kind of had to make a tough decision to say, do we have it in us both personally from a financial perspective, working, 3+ years on a business, or is this potentially something that we just have to shut down and move on? So that's what I did. We decided to shut down shop. Probably the hardest decision I've ever made in my life, one of. And then that kind of led me to working in a number of different consulting gigs. I worked with a group out on the West Coast known as Founder Gym, and they help underrepresented founders to raise venture capital. Did a number of different things, and then found NFTs and kind of have been here for the most part full-time ever since. And that was in, I found them in around May, so around 6 months.
But it sounds like 5 years, right?
it feels like 5 years. I know every time I think about it, I'm like, oh my gosh, I have like so many, like everything has happened so quickly, and everyone who's in NFTs knows, like it happens. It's a whirlwind. Every single day is something different, which I also think is a wonderful and beautiful superpower of people with ADHD. It's like we're so used to being like, oh, it's novel and this is exciting over here, and then oh, this is changing. Let's go over here. So I think it's a really big advantage for folks that are neurodiverse.
So we should tell people with ADHD that NFT is for you. It's stressful for me.
I'm doing it. That's for sure. I'm telling them, come, we're welcomed here.
we're welcome here and we can be successful. So
Yes,
that's good.
I think that's like that's one of my theses is that Web3 will be very kind to folks that are neurodiverse.
Good. Well, so how did you discover NFT? Did you read something, or somebody told you? Like, what was your journey? Like, how did you
Yeah. Well, as an
arrive to it?
entrepreneur, as an entrepreneur, I've come across and I follow Gary Vee for a very long time, and so when he started talking about NFTs, I wouldn't say it made sense immediately, but it sparked my interest enough to just kind of start reading more and researching more. And then for whatever reason, it was one of the episodes that he was on, Kevin Rose, who is a venture capitalist as well and is a big collector in the NFT space.
Mm-hmm.
They were talking on his podcast called Modern Finance. And for whatever reason, the way that they positioned it, the way that they kind of had that conversation back and forth, and just my experience in startups and tech, it sort of all made sense to me. And there was this massive light bulb that went off that I could just see the potential. I could see all the various use cases for, just countless industries, regardless of where they were coming in, whether that was my sports world with ticketing, whether that was like transparency of blockchain and nonprofits and the work I did there, or entrepreneurship and this idea of like data sovereignty and ownership. All of a sudden, like we were talking about, everything just kind of clicked and it all made sense. And I think the one thing that, among many things, but one of the things that Gary and the VFriends team did exceptionally well was onboarding folks. So the realization that, most of our community probably doesn't know what these are. And so how do we educate to bring them in a way that, you can go the route of USD and allow people to pay by credit card, but their process was really just the acknowledgement that folks should be learning how to download a wallet. What does that look like? And then we all kind of, a group of us just sort of did it together. I think he onboarded around like over 3,000 people into the space in that one moment. And to me, it was just so unbelievably beneficial the way that they educated.
Wow. So education was a big one. So the onboarding process was huge. Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Good.
And they really like broke it down step by step, right? Like they could have done it very differently. They could have written a blog post, but they really brought the community along as a community as well. Like those of us that were in it sort of from the beginning there, the Discord was very small at that moment in time. And they sort of brought us all along, almost like a cohort, like we were being taught at the same time. And even now still, I formed in that Discord a group of individuals that are Canadians in Ontario that we still talk every single day in the space. And I know that's an experience so many of us have had.
Yeah. And I think it's also like, we were coming out of COVID. I mean, we're still in COVID, but I think like we were so isolated. And I think like, yes, we have our family and friends, but it's like, oh my God, I need other adults. I need other friends. That's actually was like a perfect timing to build communities. That's
100%.
Yeah.
And I think and tech advancement too, right? Like I feel, especially from my world of social impact and trying to integrate tech into there, like a lot of these systems are just archaic historic systems that COVID finally allowed for this like digital adoption and mainstream adoption among folks that, quite frankly, I believe would have taken a decade or more to get there.
People were forced.
Exactly. We didn't have a choice.
It's like I think we hate change. I think like there are some people
unless you're neurodiverse.
yes. But overall, I think it's just like, you have to be a pioneer or like, early adopter. But in most of time, people, and I think we're doing a lot of research at Layer, it's like, it's a learning curve. And then I think learning new things, people like feel kind of a little bit overwhelmed. It's like, oh, I have to learn so many different things. I have to learn one more thing. And I think also like with COVID, people had no choice. I think they kind of had to like, I have to do my classes on Zoom. I have to figure out different tools. But I think, I think my next question is I think you kind of more, I've seen a lot of your conversation on Twitter. I mean, the little that I know you, I think you bring a lot of education about diversity. And I think it's essential because I do think And I think diversity, and even in the simple ways, like how do you address people? I felt like it was so, I know it's such a simple post, but I don't think people know. I don't think we were really even educated. How do we address each other in a space without going into genders, or like how do we like show inclusion? And so where is your passion coming from about diversity and inclusion? Like how did you how did you arrive into the space in NFTs that this is my passion and this is what I want to bring to the space? What was like your aha moment maybe? Or
yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's a couple of different things. I mean, I myself am an underrepresented person in a couple of different ways. One, in that I'm a woman, but I have privilege in that I'm a white cis woman, but I'm also identify as a lesbian woman, and I have a wife and I have a daughter, so I'm also a mom. And so part of it is my own identity and what that looks like, and how I experience the world. The other part is my experience as a lesbian woman being involved in the LGBTQ community. I've kind of volunteered there for a very long time. I worked for an organization called the 519 in Toronto, and we basically focused on LGBTQ programs and services. And then I was brought on very fortunately by a private philanthropic donor to work on a community center that was focused on building safe and inclusive spaces for all people. So what does it look like if one community that's underrepresented, like the LGBT community, comes forward and uses their experience, but also acknowledges that they don't have the experience of all underrepresented people? What does it look like to take a leadership role in that, to build a conversation around safety and belonging that is much broader in terms of inclusion than just these micro segments? There's a huge value to the micro segments and the sub communities within that. But I think the way that I look at it is, for me, I like to talk about inclusion in all facets, and kind of seeing if I can provide an idea of inclusion holistically from an umbrella perspective, and I can know sort of what's going on in all these different micro communities. And that's not just, Black, brown folks, Indigenous folks, LGBTQ, but that's also neurodiverse folks. That's also folks with disability. That's also, we talked about age and class. Like there's so many different subsets. But I just feel like if we talk about it from a much higher level, at least, that becomes an opportunity for us to bring together community. And then within that, there's obviously going to be groups that span out from there, because I can never have, nor can I ever really truly empathize with the experience of an Indigenous woman. And so there comes a point in time where my expertise can't go any further, but if I know what's happening, I can at least make connections within these communities that will hopefully allow them to be more effective, and for them to feel the safety and the belonging that they need generally within NFTs, I think. So I think that's part of it. And then the other thing that I really talk about in this space is also from my own personal experience, which is just mental health. Like my backstory is that I've been in psychiatric care from the time I was 12 years old, diagnosed with depression and anxiety at a very young age, but also have a lot of privilege in that I'm from Canada. So we have free healthcare and services. So I was able to have, and still am till this day, have a psychiatrist that is at my disposal. I have a mindfulness cognitive behavioral therapist, which is just mind-blowing to me. But because of where I live, I had access, and I was born to parents that were, despite the stigma surrounding mental health, open to getting a 12-year-old assistance in seeking out support. And so I think I really just see it as taking the moments where I have had privilege in my life and using whatever tiny platform that I have. I'm just passionate about bringing that to this space. And the thing that I always tell folks is that regardless of where you're coming from, you have something valuable to add here. Like you as a person, you as an individual, you as your lived experiences, all can bring value to this space. And if we can all kind of reflect on what that is, then we all bring this here with our full authentic selves and can really make some meaningful change and ensure that as we move forward, we don't really go back to making the same mistakes that we did in Web 2. Like, that's the terrifying part to me.
Well, I think there's a lot of there's a lot of awareness about this, right? And I think like everybody who comes to the space are very aware like what's Web 2.0, Web 3.0, and how can we, and I think also community, I think we keep each other accountable. If like somebody, it's like I think keeping each other accountable and also like kind of educating. And I do think, especially with the mental health, I do think it's actually really important to share the stories, because I always say you never know who you will inspire. And I think somebody said today on Twitter, maybe it was you, that it's like, oh, you never, like, you share your story and you never know who is going to get inspired, or like it's, we're all kind of a heroes of every day in some ways, because people are there. But I do think with mental health specifically right now, the space is moving so fast and it's so exciting. It almost feels like we have to talk about mental health, because we might be doing something exciting and good, but in the long run, it's not sustainable. If you like cannot disconnect from social media, if you don't sleep, if you don't do like basic stuff, then it's like, while you're doing some great things, it might be affecting you in the long run.
No, I think 100% agree. And I'm oftentimes having conversations with folks, and, you know, I'm not an artist. So my, the way that I move about this space is very different. I'm quote unquote a collector, and then I'm trying to do some advocacy work as well as helping with some consulting around it. But for me, the way that I'm really looking at this space, like a lot of folks are like, well, how are you doing it? And how are you balancing? And the first thing I always say is like, I'm not. Like, I am not doing a good job. I know exactly, because I've spent my entire life developing this toolbox of tools that I can lean on when I need assistance. I know what I should be doing. I know the amount of sleep I should be getting. I know how I should be eating. I know how I should be having motion and physical activity in my day-to-day. And yet that doesn't mean that I'm doing all those things. We talked about it earlier, like my meditation practice is there, and I always go back to it, but you always wait until like that last moment when things are really, really awful to go back to those things. Like the proactivity behind my self-care needs a little bit of work. But I think acknowledging that in the first place is where we start, right? If I were to pretend like everything is okay, and a conversation I've had with a couple of people in the space is, toxic positivity is also a thing, right? There is a lot of positivity in this space, but to me, there's a balance between positivity that is inspirational and based on real life experiences, and positivity that is a bunch of nice words strung together that don't actually have any depth or breadth to them. And I think for me, I like to focus on obviously the former than the latter, and just saying like realness. There's a lot of things I'm doing wrong. There's a lot of ways I could be better with my mental health, with balancing my social media, and, you know, always thinking like I'm missing out. But at least I'm acknowledging that, and that will allow me to stay accountable to me, and hopefully all of us eventually to stay accountable to one another.
Yeah. And it's a new space, as you said, it's just 6 months. And so I think at first we all came, and it's everybody's excited, overworked, over everything. And I do believe I think the more people be transparent, right, the more we'll just kind of, because the thing is, I know in terms of positivity, if somebody like constantly sharing that they're positive and everything is fine, then the rest of people feel like, well, there's something wrong with me. But the moment you say, you know, I'm having this challenge, then person actually feel like, oh, I'm not alone. Everybody having the same challenge. So we have to do something different. You know?
And for me too, I was also very open, like before I started consulting in this space, I was like, I'm a collector, and that just means I spend money, and I need to figure out how to make money in this space and sustain myself, and, you know, provide a living for my family. I can't talk about, on the one hand, that I see this as a moment of generational wealth, but then not also focus on my own generational wealth and financial freedom as a result of that. And so, just talking about what's real to you in that moment, whether that's something that's really great or whether that's something that's really shitty that's happening. I think it just allows, when we are vulnerable and are like truly being our authentic selves and talking about the challenges as much as we're talking about the opportunities, then we give other people permission to do the same thing, regardless of whether we know it or not.
Yeah. And I think that was like kind of my question is about how can we make a space better? And I think in this way, we a little bit got into mental health, not about like diversity and how to bring more female and more diversity in terms of different people from different, classes, ages, genders, nationalities. But I do think I think that's what I kind of want to. I think we covered the mental health, just being transparent and honest with each other. I always just kind of tell people, yeah, it's kind of scary. I'm almost scared of pretty much every day I'm doing something new. I have no clue. And as a co-founder, it's just like I only have 30-40% of information. And the next day it's a different information and I have to make decisions on the fly. And I think it's been very inspiring for people to hear that, like, oh, she doesn't know it all. They don't know it all. And it's okay. And somebody actually told me, one of my mentors, they said, nobody knows anything 100% in NFT space. Everybody just learning as they go. It's very new. So if you came 3 months later, this is just the separation between you and other people. So you can eventually catch up, and maybe not, but you still can be successful and you can do things in the space. Yeah. But to kind of finalize it, how can we, you think, can bring more diversity into the space right now? What can we all do?
Yeah.
Not all, but probably leaders in the space.
Yeah. And I think that like there are folks that are doing, I think first and foremost, acknowledging that there's a problem, no different than your mental health, right? Like we can't pretend like this isn't an issue here. We can't pretend like decentralization and Web3 and blockchain has made everything better, because it hasn't. Yeah. And if we pretend to do that, then we are at risk of repeating a lot of the same issues that we found in Web 2 and a lot of the reason why we're all here. And so I think first and foremost, we have to acknowledge that there's a problem. I like the fact that we talk about inclusion for the most part from our lived experiences. And I think that's where a lot of the most meaningful conversation comes from. But I do also think there's a conversation that needs to be had about inclusion holistically and what does underrepresented mean, and what is the vast array of individuals that are within that umbrella, because there's a ton. And really, when we think about working together collaboratively, that's a great opportunity, but it's much easier said than done. Like it's very difficult to collaborate. And one thing that I've seen in the space, which is a little bit concerning, quite frankly, is that those of us that are underrepresented, whether that is just a group of women, a group of folks that happen to represent as Black folks or brown folks or Indigenous folks, they're spending a lot of time in spaces talking about these problems and talking about these issues. And I think the bigger challenge is that, one, as artists, the time they're spent in those spaces, it's not that it's not well spent, but it's also time spent away from their own financial freedom and the work that they have to do. So it's an additional barrier on top of all of that. But if you come from these lived experiences and you see these problems, you want to be a part of the solution. So I think what we can do in terms of like, we need to get more folks into the room. Like it can't just be the same people that are talking about the same problems all the time. And quite frankly, I don't have all the answers. I'm working on a number of different things to try to come up with them. And we all have something to add. Like from my perspective, what I'm trying to do is just tweet every day, like tips and tricks that I've learned along the way that are like the 101s of inclusion and diversity, that if you went to the organization I used to work with previously, that's like common sense. It's all common sense. But if you come into a space, you can't assume that these things are common sense, and a lot of them are not. And so just simple, easy points of just how we can be more inclusive and how we can create more safe spaces for all people, and just acknowledging what does that mean, I think is really important. Another thing that I've been trying to do is just like the exploration of me saying things about diversity and inclusion is one thing, but I know that my voice and the way that I present or my identity is not going to be as far-reaching potentially as someone else or something else. And so one thing I've been exploring lately is this idea of taking one of my PFPs, like we've been seeing in a lot of different ways, and making a brand around that, and trying to figure, I've got a cool cat and I'm fortunate enough to have a cool cat. and I've called her Diversity Darla. And she kind of represents, like, to me, she symbolizes like me and my identity in the space. And then how do I create a storyline around her where she can share the tips and tricks and the 101s? My thesis is that she may be able to speak to a larger group of people than I will. And her message, or the same message that I say versus what Diversity Darla says, may be received differently and may be able to reach more people. So just kind of exploring and testing, like very entrepreneurial, right? Like we just need to test and
we
look
experiment.
At
it's
working.
a big, from Buddhist perspective, it's all big experiment. You know, it's just like we just have to kind of, I mean, and with NFTs and Web 3.0, you know, we can create a lot. And I think there's a lot of potential, and I think it's good to see people like you doing the right things. And I think I'm glad you made it early. I think you're creating a change, and I'm looking forward to. I will continue following you on Twitter. Huge fan, and we are hoping that we'll do something with Layer Technologies. But Kristina, thank you so much for your time. It was really inspiring for me.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited to talk at the event on December 10th. So thanks so much for having me.